Welcome, live streamers. Glad you're with us. Let's make sure we're up. We are encoded and streaming. 1 minute till we launch. We've got notifications going off here. About 1:30, we'll get started. Welcome in, everybody. A lot of familiar names on the attendee list so far. We are early. Thank you for being early, by the way. Really appreciate you being here early. I'm going to go ahead and unlock. I won't do that quite yet. We've got some special stuff going on today. Not only a special guest, we've got a special activity with our special guest. So we'll be introducing Mr. Halpern here in just 1 second. I'm going to hit record in 60 seconds. Welcome, friends. Glad you're here. Hopefully my children stay off the Wi-Fi and we have no interruptions in our uplink. It is almost summer vacation, but I've got a college kid who's home already on break, but I expect him in the audience today. We'll see. All right, we're trickling in.
Eric, is this the first podcast where your wife Tina has joined?
She's been on a couple, I think, actually.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm loving the attendee list so far. A lot of good names out there.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome, everybody.
All right, I'm going to hit record in about 10 seconds, and then we can get started. Derek, I'm going to spotlight you and skip.
Eric, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Me. You know what? I will do that in just 1 second. Thank you, William, for that heads up. Go ahead and do that. And speaker view, spotlight. We're going to go ahead and recording. Great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Eric Johnson, and we're here running into the fog again with my brother, Derek Johnson. Hey, Derek.
Eric, how are you?
I'm doing great. And our special guest, Samuel Skip Halpern. Hey, Skip. How are you today?
Hello, all.
Welcome to Running Into the Fog. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. With that countdown, I feel like I was on a launching pad and I'm in orbit now.
Well, you know, we're pretty sophisticated out here in Wisconsin. It gets pretty crazy. Well, I've really been looking forward to this today, Skip. And by the way, I've got a special announcement. This very book is going to be raffled off during this hour. Now, you might be wondering how you enter the raffle. Well, if you have been redeeming these, which are the POAPs, which are helping us to spread the word on this, you finally will understand what the POAPs are for. Proof of attendance protocol NFTs are being used by us to help you to figure out how to participate at a deeper level in what we're doing, both in the live stream podcast as well as other places. And in about 33 minutes, we're going to be running this raffle. Now, I'm going to take you real briefly through how this is going to work. So watch my screen, and very, very briefly, POAPs are the NFTs we're redeeming today. Here's an example of one from March. This was a contributor token that we gave away back in the middle of March. Now, I did not earn this specific token, but you're probably wondering how you redeem them. And you're going to need a crypto wallet of some kind. Now, Brave is a browser that has a crypto wallet built into it. And I'm just going to demonstrate for you very quickly how to get to your Brave crypto wallet. I've set mine up and I can get into it here. And here you can see it's a brand new wallet. There are no assets in this wallet as of right now. In order to redeem a POAP, you want to take your crypto wallet address, your public address, and then you're going to paste it in. This is a sample POAP from our time at Skip, Derek, by the way. If you did a social post at Skip, we gave you a POAP. And so I'm going to insert my wallet address here, and I'm going to mint that POAP to my wallet. So in the background, that POAP is now being added to my collection. And here on, it's pending, and congratulations. I now have redeemed that POAP, and you'll now see it in my POAP collection right there. Easy as pie, right? Derek, I bet you could even do that, right?
I'm not so sure, but I'm ready to get into this podcast. So are we done here?
We are.
Awesome.
That raffle for Skip's book, you're going to need your POAPs here, and you're going to want to scan this QR code right here in order to redeem it. So go ahead and, oops. Oh, I've got to stop sharing. There we go. Go ahead and scan that QR code, and we'll be making that available later. So with that, Derek, do you want to kick us off here and introduce Skip Halpern?
I sure do. First of all, Skip, thank you very much for joining us today. You come to us from the Shenandoah Valley, just outside of Washington, D.C. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. In Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, near D.C.
Okay. Nice. I also have a copy of your book right in front of me. And for our listeners today, I want to start out by reading a couple excerpts. These come from the Bernie Madoff chapter, looking at page 131 for anybody following along at home. So work is play. According to Mark Twain, work consists of whatever a body is obliged to do, and play consists of whatever a body is not obliged to do. However, for many people, work is a form of play. You go on in that particular chapter to talk about Dr. Harry Markowitz, who's somebody I've actually studied a little bit about in my training in yesteryear around the investment principles that Markowitz put forward. And you close that particular excerpt with looking back on his career. Markowitz now explains on his website that I often consider work to be play. Mark Twain notwithstanding, when work is fulfilling, the lines between work and play blur. And I wanted to start with that because it was a meaningful portion of at least that chapter that I've taken in of your book, Skip. And this book, Wellsprings of Work, we're recording episode 37 here on the podcast today with you, May the 24th of 2022. And I guess I'd like to start out by asking you a two-part question. How would you summarize the book for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with it? And who did you write that book for?
Those are good questions. And thanks to both of you guys for inviting me to this. And it sounds like you've really got a well-trod path here. I think it's a terrific podcast you've got going. So openers with thanks. The book consists of stories about what makes work click for at least the fortunate people among us who really get into it. The fortunate enough to really enjoy what they do, whether it's for a living, that is an occupation, could be a hobby, could be volunteering. I really wanted to consider work in a very broad sense. The stories are really about the underlying psychic drives that can make work fulfilling for people, as well as some of the pitfalls and trapdoors along the way. The stories largely emanate from my own career. It's a combination of the investment world, law, and business, but not only. And I use the stories as not ends in themselves, but as springboards to try to explain some of the larger concepts about work. So very quickly, one of the chapters you just cited, Derek, is about work in terms of play and competition, but I used an episode from analyzing and happily avoiding an investment with Bernie Madoff as an example of that, because what it really involved, as I look back on it, it was sort of a mental arm wrestling match as we tried to work through the hype surrounding Madoff and a particular hedge fund of funds that had a very big position with his particular fund. And then I extrapolate from there to other types of work that really, I think, bring out a sense of competition or a sense of play, which I think are very closely interrelated. And sometimes, to just elaborate a little bit on what the chapter discusses, there are many forms of this. So, for example, I think a lot of people have an urge, whatever kind of work, broadly defined, they're doing, to achieve their personal best. I consider that a form of competition against oneself, but there is competition against others as well. And I recall in that chapter citing, for example, a professional hockey player, a guy named Eric Nestorenko, who talks about forging your own identity by showing that you're better than the other guy. So that's a very different kind of play and competition. But I think both of those operate frequently in the work world. In terms of audience, I started with an audience of one, which was myself, because I didn't initially intend to be writing a book. I intended to be trying to think through, as I entered semi-retirement, what really motivated me? Why did I find my full-time career so gratifying? And as I got deeper into it, I thought, gee, maybe I've really latched onto something here. And it could apply to a range of other people. And by the end of the process with the final book, I'd say the audiences are defined really in two respects, one by age, one by type of work. By age, it runs the gamut. I've had a lot of people tell me that those just beginning a work life, on the verge of it, or early in a career, are finding it very helpful to make them think about what they're looking for, what they might get out of their careers. I've had people midway through, people in their 40s and 50s, tell me, boy, I wish I had read this 20 years ago. And then I've had a lot of comments from people either on the edge of or into retirement saying, this really helps me think through what my own life and my career have been and how they've unfolded. By occupation, I'd say it's across the gamut. The most obvious focus is the world from which the stories have emanated, investing, business, law. But this applies much more broadly, because while the stories, I think, get each chapter going, I try to apply the concepts more broadly to all sorts of work, whether it's an architect or an engineer or a craftsperson. I think a lot of these concepts apply very broadly.
Nice. Yeah, so back when you were working your professional career full-time, as for our listeners, you and I didn't intersect one-to-one, like you did with Warren Buffett or some of those types of characters in this book. But actually, the firm I worked for at the time, how we got connected for today's podcast came through our mutual friend, Evan Weston. And
Right.
fact is, I used to fill out some of your questionnaires way back in the day for IFS. So it's kind of funny how the world revolves in a circle and eventually comes full circle in that regard. Eric, what do you have question-wise for Skip here in the opening half hour of our time?
Well, so apologies, by the way, I'm doing a few of these technical things in the background, and I want to audibly, first of all, remind everybody that we're cutting you social live streamers, you anonymous folks, the Russian botnet, привет, российская сеть роботов. Those folks are going to be going away at the half hour. So if you don't convert over and sign up to stay on this bridge, we're going to say goodbye. And when we do convert over, we're going to turn you, Skip, over to three of our contributors, up to three, anyway, during the second half for the unspeakable half hour. And I need volunteers for that. We need volunteers for that. So let us know in the chat if you'd like to be a contributor in the second half. My big question for you, Skip, is, the pandemic really demonstrated for a lot of people how meaningless their work was. And as they reflected on how they were spending their lives, and as mortality seemed a little more immediate, they quit en masse. A lot of people decided they were going to go do something else. And this great resignation, as it's been called, really took place at a time when we were, as a nation, grappling with a lot of our identity issues. I mean, we had a very contentious presidential election. We are now trying to figure out what American hegemony means in a post-hegemonic world, potentially, and all this stuff between Russia, China, Ukraine, Taiwan, all the uncertainty around baby formula, for crying out loud. I mean, it seems like the chaos is worse than ever, and people, often obsessed with their work, are now turning to that work for meaning. So talk to us a little bit about the Great Resignation and how the search for meaningful work is explained, by what you noticed in writing Wellsprings.
Yeah, that's a big question with many big answers. Sticking just narrowly with the label you used, Eric, I think a lot of people have actually taken issue with that phrase, which has caught on, the Great Resignation. Perhaps a better summary is the Great Reconfiguration. I think a lot of people, and it's hard to get good empirical data on this, but a lot of people quit for, I'd say, or moved on to other positions for the most fundamental material reasons. Gee, I can get better pay, I can get better benefits, I can have more flexible hours, I can have a more flexible physical location, that sort of thing. And that was especially true, I think, in industries such as hospitality and leisure, restaurants, that sort of thing. But some people clearly wanted to upgrade in terms of intangibles, or you might say alignment with values and purpose that were important to them, or helping them latch on to those kinds of meaning and purpose. And I think that applies across the board. I think the most obvious is people early in a career who job jumped, looking for something better. And probably a lot of people on this podcast have read these accounts about people who hung up their spurs, maybe fearing COVID, maybe otherwise. And then as the pandemic has at least subsided some, have decided to go back in to the workforce because they realize there's some form of gratification that they get from applying themselves. And one of the explanations, and there's a lot of press on this, was an editorial I read maybe only 2 months ago, I think, where the journalist was wondering, why do younger people have less ambition? And the title was Anti-Ambition, as if people were less motivated to work. And this, I believe, was in the New York Times, which has an online comment section. And the comment that garnered the most responses, and it really caught my eye, was from some guy named Sebastian in Berlin, and said, this is not anti-ambition, it's greater ambition, and it's greater ambition for meaningful work. And I thought he really hit the nail on the head. And I think there are many, many cases of that, where people want to have something more gratifying in their job. I think the longer answer is in a section early in the book, in the introduction, where I'm setting the stage. One section is called Why Me? What led me personally to write this? But the next section, which is longer, is Why Now? And I think COVID is certainly a contributing factor because of all the dislocations and gymnastics that people in the workforce have gone through, and the people who employ them have gone through in the last couple of years. But I think there are some other current sorts of trends, and one longer term trend. I think one long-term trend, and this is a subject for a book in and of itself, is culturally and societally the huge impact of science and technology on our way of thinking and on our way of perceiving the world, because the world of science, so mathematically oriented, is at once very abstract, meaning not concrete, and paradoxically, also, I'd say, very materialistic, because in classical scientific thinking, higher states of mentality and spirituality and psychology are explained in a reductionist way, as opposed to mind and spirit. Many brain scientists speak in terms of brain function, chemical reactions, biochemical reactions. So the higher is explained in terms of the lower. I think that's very dehumanizing. It sucks meaning right out of the world we inhabit. I'm not arguing the scientific merits of it for the moment. I'm talking about the impact on people seeking meaning. If meaning is just electrochemical brain function, it doesn't feel very meaningful, if you get my drift. So I think that's a huge, long-term, very subtle and pervasive factor. I think disenchantment with institutions, and we can all recount over the last 50 years, from small to large, various episodes in this country's history that have caused many people to get disenchanted with their institutions. So there's a common thread, I think, of being unmoored from things. The gig economy is another example of being unmoored, as opposed to working, whether it's in the Midwest or wherever, working for 40 years for the same employer with a defined benefit plan, at least the perception that it's a paternalistic company that cares for you. You got job security, you got job longevity. That's not the case now. You know, people juggling 2 or 3 jobs, gig economy, they're independent contractors. They might not even have a 401k plan, much less a defined benefit plan. I mean, that's a dinosaur at this point. So I think all of those things and more, and it's described in this section called Why Now, are part of that answer.
Wow. That's amazing. You know, neurochemistry is one of my passions. And, you know, most of the neurotransmitters in your brain are there to do one thing, and that's to alleviate the impact of cortisol as a stress hormone on you. All of our appetites, all of our soothing habits are driven by the elimination of cortisol, whether that's working out or drinking too much, or we'll get into some of that other stuff in Unspeakable, by the way, in the second half. Unspeakable, you can start cussing if you want to, which Derek likes to do during Unspeakable. Well, we have a first. Go ahead.
I won't cuss, but I'll just quote a book title, which was a factor in my writing this book. And the book title was Bullshit Jobs.
Right on.
And it's written by a guy now deceased as a young man, actually, named David Graeber. I think he was a Brit. And he was bemoaning all the soul-sucking, to use his term, deadening jobs out there. And I think the glass is definitely half full, but I wanted to talk about the ways in which the glass, I think the glass is half full. He wrote about how it's half empty, and I wanted a rejoinder to his bullshit jobs. And I'll say that during the speaking part.
Well, you're going to have Evan Weston as your first contributor in the second half. Evan stuck his hand up. So Evan, you're on deck. We need 2 more in the second half. So volunteers in the chat, please. Derek.
What I'll just add to that, Skip, you may know this story, or some of our listeners may know this story, but when the pandemic hit, Eric and I essentially each took a segment of the business and started running with it. You know, as the story goes, I was protecting the core to make sure that we were not going to get body blowed, you know, into oblivion. And Eric was still operating in discovery, and that's a really good balance between the two of us and our skill sets. But it was causing some tension, you know, not all that favorable, by the way, between the Johnson brothers, and thus the podcast concept was born, so that we could kind of, going back to the quote I mentioned from your book, you know, have it feel like work was play again between the Joe Bros, if you will. So, you know, that bullshit jobs, I've said it before on this podcast, you know, if I wanted to, I could have gotten any old bullshit job out there. But I wanted to stay here, and I wanted to work it through, and, you know, have this podcast to be able to come to life with my big brother. The question I have for you, Skip, is, you know, going back to I'll restate the obvious. Eric and I operate in this field of competitive strategy. And, how can companies in today's world, with all the pressures, inflation, job hopping to get a higher wage, et cetera, how can companies use the meaningful work principle as a competitive differentiator? And if you were going to go about that strategy in corporate America, what positions within inside a company, whether it be the chief operating officer or the HR team, where would you try to situate such a capability if it were you?
That's a very great question. Several answers. I'd say first and foremost, I wrote this book very intentionally from the perspective of the individual worker, professional, non-professional, a lawyer, a waitress, whatever. And I was very consciously not proceeding from the perspective of management or the HR department, because I wanted to look at it, you might say, from an experiential perspective. What's it like? What does it feel like to be that worker, to be that employee? Having said that, I actually had a guy who years ago I dealt with who was an HR professional. And he's been at that for 30 plus years, was very involved with SHRM, the Human Resource Management Group. And he said, this book should be distributed to the HR department at a whole raft of firms. And then the HR department should hand it to their new, not just brand new, but recent recruits, recent employees, because it can be simultaneously helpful to the employee and derivatively, collaterally helpful to the HR department. And, there's an awful lot of hype out there. I guess in the environmental movement, the equivalent would be greenwashing, where it sounds good on the surface, but as they say, the superficiality runs deep. If for the real thing, there's got to be an appreciation of what it's like for the working person, again, regardless of profession. Does that person feel he or she gets respect on the job, that he or she has some degree of autonomy, some degree of dignity, I'd say. And all of those words sound very platitudinous. But in the book, I try to get at a more nuanced level what that really means, what it's really like for the worker. There's a classic book. Many of the people on the podcast may have heard of it. It was written about 50 years ago. It's called Working, by a journalist out of Chicago, Studs Terkel. And it's really terrific. It's a series of, God, I don't know, might be a couple hundred 2- and 3-page interviews that Terkels did with people all across the board, stockbrokers, parking lot attendants, waitresses, professional athletes, you name it. And some of those really stick in the mind. There was one of a waitress, and I recount this because I thought it was so indicative. And thinking about it, not from the standpoint of the owner of the restaurant, but from the waitress herself. Some wise guy said to her, some customer said, gee, if you smile, I'll give you a tip. And she just sneered at him, said, I'm not doing this to get a tip. A tip is demeaning. A tip is like throwing me a bone. And that really stuck in my mind. And it gets to this notion that I'm trying to explain of respect or dignity. So I think finally, this HR guy who contacted me about the book, he said he found it helpful for himself, not just in dispensing after people in his employ, but for his own personal purposes and for his own career.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think there's absolutely something to it where, if you do it right, culture and, to your point, dignity, respect, the autonomy that you can provide your workforce, that can, in certain climates, overcome, you hit a a tough quarter, a tough series of quarters, and you need to retain those staff members. If you play it correctly and you respect them, obviously the financial compensation has to come along at some point.
Sure.
But you can use that as a key, not only attraction tool, but also a retention strategy, when you do it, in an authentic and staff driven sort of focus. And I think that's what I was trying to get at.
I think that's right. And I think of this seems very far afield, but in my mind, at least, warped as it is, it seems very connected. The book does recount, and you mentioned it in passing, an episode that I went through dealing with Warren Buffett. And long story short, we, as an independent fiduciary to a retiree medical fund, were in charge of about 57% of Kaiser Aluminum when it came out of bankruptcy in 2006. So we actually had voting control over the company once it was again public. And he was interested in buying control. And he contacted our firm, and he went up the chain, and he contacted me, and I had a number of interchanges with him. And one, which I recount in the book, he called me one Wednesday. I wasn't in. He left a message. Hi, Skip. This is Warren. It's Wednesday at 1:00. Give me a call. And I saved that. I saved that on my recording machine. And years later, I thought, why did I save that? What was really going on there? And I explained it in the book. I think it's an example of feeling like you've gotten some recognition or respect. Here was this guy, this titan, calling little old me. And it was that recognition or that respect, I realized, which was at the bottom of why I saved that message. So you take that lesson, I think, and you can apply it in many, many situations with many, many people.
That's great. I see our chat is kind of blowing up with the Studs Terkel analogies and different things too. So, Eric, I know we're going to pivot here in a minute. What do you got?
Yep. I got to say goodbye to the live streamers. Before we do that, however, I would like you to scan this different QR code right here and join us on the bridge. So if you're streaming on social right now, scan that code. It'll allow you to register and connect your crypto wallet if you'd like, and then join us here on the back end for Unspeakable. So that's the last time you're going to see that. I am going to give you 3 more seconds with that, and it's gone. Too late. And then I would like to get you all to scan the Unthinkable QR code if you want that code. Otherwise, we're going to start the raffle. So, William, if you're listening, go ahead and start the raffle if you wouldn't mind showing that. And that raffle would normally start in about 4 minutes anyway, but the raffle is beginning. If you have a POAP in from us, you stand a chance at winning Skip's book. And Evan Weston is our first contributor here in the second half. And as we bring Evan on, Evan, I'm going to add you to the spotlight and replace the rest of us here. Evan, welcome. I'm going to put you on with Skip. And Skip, here you are. There you are, gentlemen. Welcome back, Evan. Skip's all yours.
Hi, Evan.
It's so good to see you again, my friend.
Good to be seen.
Yeah, so there's so much in this book that what